The silence inside the big castle called Windsor did not break with loud shouting or screaming. It broke with a small sound, the sound of a seal being broken on a very important paper. Prince William stood in front of a locked file that had the private mark of the late Queen on it. This was a special mark that only she used for her most secret thoughts. When the final decree was opened, the whole room changed forever in a way that no one could ever forget. The air felt heavy and still. Camilla's name was written there on the page, Diana's name was written there too, and between those two names sat one sentence that was so sad and so strong that even King Charles could not pretend that the royal family had been ready for it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family and why it matters so much to everyone, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you do not miss a single update on this amazing story. William did not rush the moment at all. He held the page with the careful stillness of a man who understood that one single sentence could cut deeper than any public scandal or bad news story you see on television. The final decree was a last written royal command meant to be obeyed after the monarch had passed away. It had been sealed under the Queen's private authority so that no one could change it. It stated in plain and merciless language that Camilla was denied access to Diana's private vault, which is like a secret room where special things are kept. It also said that future authority over that vault would rest under William's protection alone. The prince looked down at the paper again, as if the words might become softer or nicer if he read them 2 times, but they did not change at all. Charles felt the blow before anyone else spoke a single word. The king sat nearby in his chair, his face tightened by a pain he could not dress up as protocol or rules. This was not merely about a locked room or a forgotten collection of old things. Diana's vault was understood inside the family as a protected space holding private items, letters written by hand, personal jewels that sparkled, and memories tied to the woman whose shadow had never truly left the monarchy. For Charles, the decree reopened the oldest wound in his household, a hurt that had been there for a long time. For William, it placed that wound directly into his hands to hold and protect. Camilla heard the decision with a stillness that did not look peaceful at all. The Queen Consort had expected some resistance, perhaps a delay, or perhaps another quiet palace compromise where everyone gives a little bit. But this was different and much harder. Her request had not been rejected by an aide, a committee, or a cautious advisor who was afraid to say no. It had been rejected by the Queen herself in writing with the full force of final royal instruction behind it. Camilla's expression changed only slightly, but everyone in the room felt it deeply. Her hope of access had not been postponed to a later date. It had been ended completely and forever. The outer door closed with a soft, deliberate sound that echoed in the quiet room. A senior aide stepped back, making clear that no courier would carry this conversation into the corridors before the family had absorbed it fully. William's hand paused over the lower fold of the file because he knew there was more to read. Beneath the first decree sat a second sealed instruction marked for future entry authority. The prince looked at Charles, then at Camilla, and understood that the most painful line had not yet been read by anyone in the room. Every royal crisis has a document that explains it, but this one had faces that showed real feelings. William saw his mother in every word that was written on the page. Charles saw the past and all the mistakes made before. He had spent decades trying to survive the hard times. Camilla saw a boundary drawn by a woman who was no longer alive to explain why she did it. And Catherine, standing just beyond the center of power, understood that this was not only a family decision made in private, it was a wound reopened by royal authority that everyone had to respect. William kept his eyes on the page, but everyone in the room knew he was seeing far more than just black ink on white paper. Diana's vault was not just a private store of royal belongings like cups or plates. It was a protected collection of personal letters, beautiful jewels, records of events, and objects linked to his mother's life, kept away from public use because they carried grief as much as history. The prince understood why the Queen had used a final decree, a written command meant to survive her death and stay strong. She had not wanted this left to mood, pressure, or palace convenience where people might change their minds. Charles shifted first in his seat, and that small movement carried more pain than any speech could have done for anyone listening. The king had a duty to uphold the queen's instruction no matter what. Yet he also had Camilla beside him, wounded by the same command that hurt him too. He wanted to soften the meaning so it would not hurt so much. He wanted to suggest the decree was about procedure and rules, not rejection of a person. But William did not allow the words to be made gentle or weak. The prince said the language was clear, and the room felt the line harden between duty and denial. Camilla looked at William as if waiting for a private mercy or a kind word from him. The queen consort knew the damage before anyone outside Windsor heard a single word about it. A refusal from the late monarch was not a simple no that you can ignore. It was a permanent mark sealed by authority, witnessed by trusted officials, and protected from casual review by anyone. She asked whether the decision could be revisited later, whether time or context might change its force and make it okay. William answered carefully, but without weakness or fear. The decree was final and could not be changed. It had been witnessed by important people, it had been sealed tight, and no one in that room had the right to rewrite the Queen's last command ever. Catherine watched him choose restraint when anger would have been easier and more fun to show. She saw the tension in his jaw that showed how hard he was trying. She saw the old hurt behind his calm voice and the heavy discipline it took for him not to speak from pain. Her presence gave him balance without taking control from him or telling him what to do. Charles noticed it too, and that made the moment even harder for him to handle. The monarchy was not only watching a son defend his mother's memory with love, it was watching a future king learn how to carry grief without letting it burn the room down and hurt everyone. Then, Catherine's eyes moved back to the file on the table. William had not mentioned the second sealed instruction yet to anyone. He had read the first blow aloud, so everyone could hear, but another fold remained untouched and silent. Another command was waiting beneath the silence to be revealed. Camilla saw the hesitation in his eyes. Charles saw it too, and as the people in the room struggled with what the decree meant for them, one older memory began to rise up in their minds, a hidden incident that had forced the Queen to write it in the first place many years ago. The decree did not appear from nowhere like magic. It was born from one unforgettable night at Balmoral, when a private conversation turned into a royal fracture that broke trust. The Queen had listened quietly, then saying almost nothing as Diana's name crossed the room like a warning sign. But those who were present later understood the truth of what happened. That was the night the monarch stopped trusting silence to protect the dead and decided to act. William remembered the moment with painful clarity in his mind. The Balmoral Memorial Dinner incident, as it later became known inside the household, was a private family dinner where Camilla asked whether several pieces from Diana's vault could be reviewed for possible historic royal display for the public to see. A royal display meant placing private objects into a curated palace exhibition so the public could see them as part of monarchy history and learn about it. But to the prince, those pieces were not exhibition material for crowds to look at. They were his mother's life, her private letters, her special jewels, and the private remains of a woman the world had already taken too much from while she was alive. Camilla had spoken carefully that night with polite words, but careful words did not make the request harmless or okay. The Queen consort insisted she wanted history handled properly, not emotionally with too much sadness. She argued that Diana's place in the monarchy should be preserved with dignity, not hidden behind locked doors where no one could see. William heard something else entirely in her words, though. He heard his mother's memory being moved from private grief into public control for others to use. The prince pushed his chair back just enough for the room to feel the movement, then asked why Diana's personal items were being discussed without his consent or permission first. Charles tried to calm the room down and stop the fight, but his voice only made the fracture wider and deeper. The king wanted peace between everyone, yet peace demanded that someone be disappointed and sad, and he could not bring himself to firmly defend either side of the argument. He looked toward Camilla, then toward William, and the hesitation in his eyes said everything that needed to be said. The prince saw it clearly. The Queen saw it too. Even Camilla understood that Charles was standing in the middle of a wound he could not close or fix. His silence became its own answer to the question. The Queen watched William's face change, and that was the moment the monarch understood the danger of the situation. Diana's memory was not simply ceremonial or fake. It was living pain inside her son that was very real. A private secretary, meaning the trusted official who handles a monarch's most sensitive written instructions, was summoned later that evening to the room. The Queen did not raise her voice or yell at anyone. She dictated the first language of the decree with cold precision, making the vault restriction personal, permanent, and impossible to soften later by anyone. Camilla believed the dinner had ended in discomfort, not serious consequence for her. William believed the matter had been buried and forgotten. Charles hoped time would make the wound less sharp and painful, but the Queen had already acted quickly and firmly. Her final wording named William as the future guardian because she believed he would protect Diana without turning grief into revenge or anger. That single dinner became the hidden root of everything that was happening now. And now, years later, the prince had to confront the woman whose request had triggered the monarch's final wall of protection. Camilla did not explode in front of the household or scream in anger. She waited until the door closed and they were alone. Then the Queen consort turned to William with a look that carried years of restraint, resentment, and disbelief at what was happening. The future king did not move or flinch at all. Charles stood between them like a man trapped between yesterday and tomorrow with no way out. In that private room, the decree became more than just paper on a table. It became a confrontation between two people with different views. William held his place as if every breath he took had to be controlled carefully. The private Windsor sitting room had no junior aides to help, no soft voices from the corridor, and no one to interrupt the damage once it began to happen. A decree, meaning a formal written order carrying royal authority, had already spoken for the Queen clearly, but Camilla wanted to hear it from him directly. She asked whether he truly intended to enforce the command exactly as written without changing anything. The prince answered quietly that he had no right to ignore the monarch's final instruction, no matter what. Camilla's face hardened at the answer she received. She said Diana's vault belonged to royal history and that royal property could not be ruled by grief forever and ever. William's restraint almost cracked under the pressure. The vault, he reminded her gently but firmly, was not a display room for tourists, not a trophy cabinet for prizes, not a place for the palace to borrow from when it needed emotional power for shows. It held his mother's private life and secrets. It held pieces of a woman who had been watched, used, loved, and broken in public by the world. And this time, he would not let her memory be handled as decoration for a show. Charles stepped forward, desperate to cool the room before the words became impossible to take back or fix. The king tried to say the decree needed careful interpretation to make sense, but Camilla turned on him before he could finish his sentence. She asked whether he had known her name was written into the restrictions specifically. Charles did not answer quickly enough to satisfy her. That pause wounded her more than any direct confession of guilt could have done. She looked at him as if the silence had confirmed what she feared deep down. The Queen had not written a general rule for everyone. She had written a boundary around Camilla herself to keep her out. Catherine moved closer to William without speaking a single word to anyone. She did not need to defend him with words. Her presence did enough to show she was there for him. The princess understood that he was standing in the middle of a family storm, trying to protect Diana without humiliating Camilla too much, trying to obey the Queen without breaking Charles's heart. And William felt that support beside him strongly. It steadied him when anger would have been easier to show. It reminded him that power without control could destroy the very memory he was trying to guard and keep safe. Camilla's shock turned sharp when William explained the full force of the order to her. The decree did not only deny her personal entry into the room, it blocked palace staff from granting access on her behalf, meaning no aide, archivist, or official could quietly open the vault under another name to help her. Camilla stared at him, stunned by how tightly the Queen had closed every possible door and window. Then the prince said one final word that changed the temperature of the room completely. Review. Any attempt to override the decree would trigger a formal review of earlier access requests to see what happened. And once he said it, the confrontation shifted from hurt feelings to royal power because someone inside the palace had already tried to move around the Queen's command secretly. Power inside the monarchy rarely looks loud or flashy. Sometimes it looks like a key held by the wrong person in their pocket. Sometimes it looks like a signature placed in the wrong ledger book by mistake. As William followed the decree's chain of authority, the room discovered why the Queen had been so precise and careful. She had not written the order out of suspicion alone or paranoia. She had written it because she feared the vault could be opened by pressure disguised as protocol and rules. William asked for the access record to check everything, and the room tightened before it arrived on the table. The decree had given him direct guardianship over Diana's vault, meaning he alone held final authority over who could enter, review, move, or approve anything connected to that protected collection of items. Catherine had been named as a supporting witness for any future ceremonial review, which meant she would stand beside him if the palace ever tried to use Diana's items for public royal purposes in a show. That detail mattered a great deal to everyone there. It meant the Queen had not trusted one signature alone to do the job. She had built a wall with witnesses to make it strong. The senior archivist entered with the old ledger pressed close to his chest tightly. An archivist is the official responsible for protecting royal records, private collections, and access logs for the family, and this one understood the danger of what he carried in his hands. He avoided Camilla's gaze as he placed the ledger before William on the table. His hands moved carefully, but the fear showed in his eyes clearly. The book was not just a record of names and dates. It was proof of who had asked, who had signed, and who had tried to reach Diana's memory through official channels in the past. William turned the pages slowly until one entry stopped him cold in his tracks. A recent internal request had been filed to catalog selected vault items for heritage review by the team. The words sounded harmless, almost dull and boring, but the prince knew how palace language worked very well. Catalog meant inspect everything closely. Heritage review meant possible display for the public to see. Selected items meant someone already knew what they wanted to take out. His quiet resolve hardened because the request did not feel like preservation of history. It felt like access dressed in ceremony to trick people. Charles saw the same line in the book and set his glasses on the table without speaking a word. The king looked embarrassed, not because he had been caught doing something bad, but because the palace machine had again turned private grief into managed procedure and paperwork. He understood why it mattered so much to his son. If Diana's vault could be opened through vague wording, then the Queen's decree could be weakened without anyone openly breaking it or going to jail. If family trust could be bypassed by paperwork, then William's authority meant nothing at all to anyone. Camilla denied ordering anything improper or wrong at all. The Queen Consort said she had not asked anyone to move around the decree or break the rules, and Charles looked toward her as if he wanted desperately to believe every word she said. But the earlier Balmoral request now stood in the room again, heavier than before and harder to ignore. William did not accuse her of lying directly. Catherine did not interrupt the flow of conversation. Still, Camilla felt the suspicions settle around her like a heavy blanket because the language in the ledger sounded too close to the old argument she had once made to the Queen. Catherine noticed it before anyone else in the room did. One page in the copied ledger did not sit right or look correct. The numbering jumped from one number to another, strangely. The sequence broke in the middle of the list. She leaned closer to look, then looked at William with a calm that carried its own alarm inside it. A page had been removed from the book by someone. Someone had tried to hide the full trail of what they did. The missing page did what shouting could not do at all. It made the fallout immediate and urgent, and it forced the family to accept that the decree had already been tested and challenged by someone. By nightfall, Windsor was no longer calm or quiet at all. Phones were silenced, so no calls could come in. Staff were moved to other rooms, and a private archive corridor was locked under new authority to keep people out. Camilla, who had entered the day expecting negotiation and talking, found herself facing a new reality that was very hard. The late Queen's word had become a wall that could not be climbed, and William was now standing in front of it with no intention of stepping aside for anyone. William gave the order with a voice that did not rise or get loud at all. The vault access system was to be frozen until the missing ledger page was found, and every previous request had been checked thoroughly by the team. An access system meant the official method used to approve entry, record names, and track movement around protected royal collections in the palace. This mattered because Diana's private vault was no longer only a room of memory and sadness. It had become a test of whether the Queen's final command could actually hold against pressure from inside the family who wanted to change it. Camilla sat alone after the meeting ended, stunned in a way anger could not hide or cover up. The Queen Consort had expected another royal compromise, the kind where painful words were softened and everyone walked away with something good. Instead, she had been told that no staff member, no archivist, and no palace official could move, photograph, catalog, or display anything linked to Diana without William's written approval on paper. The door closed behind her, and the sound felt final and forever. Her influence over that part of royal memory had ended in one single day. Charles went to her privately to talk, but comfort did not come easily for either of them. The king wanted to tell Camilla that the matter could still be handled nicely, that the palace could still find a gentler path to walk on. Yet, he knew the decree was both legally firm and emotionally impossible to dismiss or ignore. It carried the Queen's authority from beyond the grave, and it carried Diana's pain from the past. Charles sat near Camilla, choosing his words carefully so as not to hurt her more, but she understood his hesitation clearly. He could feel sorry for her pain, but he could not undo what his mother had written in the book. Catherine found William in the corridor outside the room, and her calm cut through the noise around him like a knife. She told him softly that protecting Diana's memory could not become a public act of cruelty to others. The princess knew why the vault mattered so much to him. She knew why the missing page had changed everything about the situation. But she also knew that grief once given power could become dangerous and hurtful, if not controlled. William listened because Catherine was not asking him to step back or give up. She was asking him to stay human while standing firm on his decision. Whispers moved quickly through the household among the staff and workers. Aides began saying the Queen had seen this crisis coming because the decree blocked every loophole before anyone could use one to get in. William's name now carried the full weight of enforcement of the law. Camilla's name carried the pain of exclusion from the family secret. Charles carried both burdens and could not set either one down on the ground. The immediate consequence was brutal in its simplicity and clarity. Camilla no longer had influence over Diana, linked royal memory in any way. Not quietly, not indirectly, not through staff members who liked her. And as the machinery of restriction tightened around the vault like a vice, William faced the harder question Catherine had placed before him to answer. How to protect his mother without letting pain rule him and make him mean. The turning point did not happen in a big council room with many people. It happened in a smaller chamber, away from aides, away from protocol, away from the machinery that had made everyone harder than they wanted to be. William and Charles stood alone at last with no one else around. For once, there was no crown between them to separate them. Only a son, a father, and the memory of a woman they both loved. Neither of them could escape the past or the present. William entered first, carrying the silence of the day with him in his heart. Charles followed more slowly, and the king looked older than he had that morning when the sun came up. A council room was where official royal decisions were debated and argued, but this was different and more personal. This was private, stripped of titles and ranks, stripped of witnesses, stripped of every careful phrase that had protected them for years from the truth. The prince did not come to accuse his father of doing something wrong. He came because Catherine's words had followed him into the room. Protect Diana, but do not let pain rule you and make you angry. Charles spoke before William could begin to say anything at all. He admitted the decree hurt because it proved how unfinished the past still was inside the family and their hearts. The king said the queen had not only protected a vault of things, she had exposed the part of the monarchy that still could not say Diana's name without tension entering the room and making everyone nervous. William listened, and for once he did not interrupt his father at all. He understood that Charles was not defending Camilla in that moment of weakness. He was facing the cost of a life that had left too many hearts carrying different versions of the same wound and pain. William answered with a calm that made the words heavier and more important. He told Charles the decision was not about punishing Camilla for what she did. It was about honoring the Queen's final boundary and protecting Diana's private dignity from the world. The prince said his mother had given enough of herself to the public during her life, enough to the palace, enough to history books. Whatever remained behind that vault door had to stay untouched unless it served truth, not image or fame. Charles looked down when William said Diana's name, not with anger, not with bitterness, only grief and sadness. Charles became visibly emotional, and that changed the air between them completely. The king had expected resistance, perhaps blame, perhaps the old pain returning as fire to burn them. Instead, William gave him restraint and kindness. The prince said the missing ledger page would not be used as a weapon against Camilla unless clear misconduct was proven beyond doubt. He would not turn suspicion into punishment for no reason. He would not let grief become revenge against his stepmother. Charles heard the difference in his son's voice, and for the first time that day, he seemed to understand the man standing before him as a grown-up. William waited for his father's answer to his words, and Charles finally gave it with a nod. The king accepted that the vault had to remain protected and safe. He agreed not to challenge the decree in court, not to ask for softer language, and not to pressure him into turning the Queen's final command into a palace compromise for peace. That acceptance did not heal everything that was broken. It did not erase Camilla's pain or Diana's shadow from the room, but it gave the crisis a new shape and direction. The turning point was not victory for one side. It was control over emotions. William would enforce the Queen's command firmly, but without public humiliation of anyone. Charles would carry the sadness of that choice, but not fight it anymore. And that restraint changed the shape of the crisis for the better. But outside palace walls, the world was already preparing to turn one sealed decree into a national reckoning and debate. By morning, the secret had escaped the walls of the castle and gone to the newspapers. Britain woke to a royal story that felt less like gossip and more like history striking the table with a loud bang. One headline carried the force of a verdict from a judge. One image carried the sorrow of a generation of people. And as crowds gathered beyond the palace gates, Diana's name returned to the center of the monarchy with a power no one could control or stop. William saw the front page before the first palace response had been approved by the team. The headline was brutal and hard to read. The Queen's Final Wall, Camilla barred from Diana's vault. Beside it sat a split image of the prince and the late princess, turning a private family decree into a national wound for everyone to see. A newspaper front page matters because it does not simply report a moment in time. It fixes it in public memory forever. William understood that instantly when he saw it, and the weight of it troubled him deeply. He had wanted protection for his mother, not spectacle for the crowds. Camilla watched the coverage from a private room in the house, and every word seemed to tighten around her name like a rope. The Queen Consort had been denied access in private, but now the country was reading it as rejection, judgment, and history all at once. A broadcaster described the decree as the most emotionally charged royal order of the modern reign of the family, and that phrase began moving everywhere on TV and radio. A royal order means an official command backed by the authority of the crown and the law. For Camilla, that made the humiliation deeper, because this was not being treated as family tension between people. It was being treated as monarchy law that must be followed. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace before midday when the sun was high. Some carried white roses, placing them near the gates, as if Diana's memory had suddenly become present again in the air. The gesture was quiet, but it spoke louder than any studio debate on television. People were not only reacting to Camilla being blocked from the room, they were reacting to the idea that the Queen had drawn a final line around Diana's private life that no one could cross. That mattered because it gave the public a simple emotional truth to hold on to. Even after all these years, some parts of Diana still needed defending from the world. Catherine urged restraint when the palace team began drafting its statement to the press. She told William that the response had to protect dignity, not feed division and fighting. The princess knew that one wrong sentence could turn Camilla into a target for hate and William into a weapon of war. The prince listened, still bothered by the front page he saw, still aware that his mother's name could stir love and anger in equal measure in people's hearts. Catherine's calm mattered because she understood both sides of public emotion perfectly. Sympathy could become cruelty if the palace mishandled it and said the wrong thing. Charles approved the final message with a heavy heart in his chest. The king allowed the palace to confirm that Diana's private collection would remain protected under established royal authority and law, but he refused to let the statement attack Camilla or call her names. William accepted that choice made by his father. Camilla remained wounded by it and sad. Catherine watched the language land exactly where it had to land, firm, quiet, final, and clear. And when the public noise finally settled down after a while, the monarchy was left with the only question that mattered most. Not who had won the fight, but what the decree had revealed about the family. In the end, the decree did not destroy the monarchy or break it apart. It exposed it to the light. It showed where grief still lived in the hearts of the family, where loyalty still mattered to them, and where the past could no longer be rearranged for comfort and ease. William had opened a sealed command from the Queen. But what he truly unsealed was a truth the family had avoided for years and years. Diana's memory was not a room to be entered and looked at. It was a boundary to be respected and honored by everyone. William completed the final enforcement with a steadiness that felt heavier than victory or winning a game. The formal order was placed before him on the desk, and the prince signed it without celebration or happy dancing. An enforcement order means the written step that turns a royal command into active palace practice for all to follow, making sure staff, officials, and family members must follow it without question. This mattered because the Queen's decree could no longer be treated as a painful private wish that might change. It had become the rule that protected Diana's vault from pressure, confusion, and quiet negotiation by anyone. Charles watched the signature land on the paper and accepted what it meant for them all. The king felt visible sadness because honoring his mother's command also meant admitting the limit of his own power as king. He could not soften the decree for Camilla to make her happy. He could not rewrite the Queen's final boundary for comfort and ease. Charles understood that the monarchy had reached a point where duty demanded pain and sacrifice. He had spent years trying to hold the past together with glue, but this time, the past had spoken back through his mother's hand and pen. Camilla was not publicly attacked in the papers, and William made sure of that fact. The Queen Consort's access was definitively denied and stopped, but the prince refused to turn the decision into humiliation for her to suffer. Her role in Diana-linked royal memory was permanently limited and small. Yet her name was not dragged through a public trial in the media. That restraint mattered because it proved William was not acting as a wounded son seeking revenge on his stepmother. He was acting as a future king, learning that power becomes dangerous when it is fed by anger and hate. Catherine stood beside him as the final papers were placed away in the safe. The princess did not look triumphant or happy about winning. She did not need to speak to show her feelings. Her quiet support carried the meaning of the day for everyone. Diana's dignity had been protected from harm, but no one in that room had truly won the fight. The missing ledger page had been recovered and sealed into the review file, ending the immediate panic without turning the crisis into another palace war between sides. The danger had been contained and stopped. The lesson had not been forgotten by anyone. William closed the file at last, and the silence that followed felt different from the silence that began it all those hours ago. The Queen's final decree had protected Diana's private dignity from the world, forced the prince into mature authority as a leader, and made Charles face the cost of unresolved history in his life. Camilla left with a boundary she could not cross no matter what. Catherine remained beside a man who had chosen restraint over rage and anger. The monarchy emerged bruised but steadier because this time it chose memory over image and fame, duty over comfort and ease, and silence over spectacle and shows. There was no further mystery left to chase or solve. only William closing the file, not as a wounded son seeking revenge on others, but as a future king choosing protection, restraint, and duty above all else. Thanks for watching this story today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you in the next video soon.